A worried husband leaves message after message. "Hiya, Rach. Ring me when you get this." His voice sounds emotional, concerned, almost desperate. But years later, investigators would listen to those same voicemails again and realize something chilling. The messages weren't proof of panic, they were proof of performance. Because while he was calling his missing wife, evidence suggested he already knew she would never answer. This is the story of Rachel O'Reilly and how ordinary voicemails helped uncover an extraordinary lie. Rachel Kalali grew up in a family that centered itself around togetherness. Her parents, Jim and Rose, raised her with a quiet warmth, the kind of household where the door was always open, where meals were shared and problems were talked through. Rachel carried that warmth with her everywhere she went. Friends remembered her as someone who noticed people, who remembered the small things, who showed up when others didn't. She trained as a beauty therapist. She was good at her work, but what she wanted most was simple: a home, a family, a life built on something solid. She met Joe O'Reilly in her early 20s. He was confident, well-presented, the kind of man who walked into a room and made it feel smaller. They married in 2000, settled in the Knoll, had 2 young boys. From the outside, everything looked exactly as it was supposed to. But from the inside, behind the closed front door, something was already beginning to fracture. Joe had grown distant, cold in ways that were hard to name, but impossible to ignore. Rachel confided in family. She was worried about the marriage. She was trying to hold things together. What she didn't know was that Joe had already decided it was over. Not in the way people decide to sit down and have a difficult conversation. In another way entirely. In 2004, Joe O'Reilly was living 2 lives. At home, a husband, a father, a man with a mortgage and a routine. And somewhere else, a man in a relationship with a colleague named Nikki Pelly. This wasn't a brief lapse. It wasn't a mistake he was trying to walk back from. By the time October came around, Joe had been seeing Nikki for long enough that people close to him knew. He had told at least one person that his marriage was finished. Not that it was struggling, not that he was unhappy. Finished. Prosecutors would later argue that Joe O'Reilly didn't want a divorce. Divorces are complicated. They cost money. They split houses and custody arrangements and futures. Joe, investigators came to believe, wanted something cleaner, something that left him standing on the other side of it all as a victim, a grieving widower, a man the world felt sorry for. And on the morning of October the 4th, 2004, he tried to make that happen. In 2004, the village of Knoll in North County Dublin was the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever happened. A population of only a few hundred people, unlocked doors, familiar faces. Rachel O'Reilly lived there with her husband Joe and their 2 young sons. She was 30 years old, a devoted mother known for warmth and kindness. Friends described her as steady, grounded, and deeply focused on family life. From the outside, the O'Reilly home looked ordinary. October 4th, 2004, began like any other Monday. Rachel dropped off her young son at Montessori school. Nothing unusual, no signs of distress. But at 12:30 p.m., something strange happened. She never arrived to collect him. Staff waited. They called her phone. No answer. Concern quickly turned into alarm because Rachel was known for being punctual and reliable. The daycare contacted Joe. He said he hadn't heard from her either. Soon, Rachel's mother, Rose Kalali, received a call asking her to check the house. As she drove toward her daughter's home, a feeling she couldn't explain settled in. Something wasn't right. Inside the bungalow, Rachel was found dead. She had been beaten. The attack was savage, personal, the kind of violence that doesn't come from a stranger passing through. The peaceful village instantly became the center of a national investigation. Joe O'Reilly told Gardaí he believed a burglar had entered the home. Items appeared disturbed. Some belongings were later found discarded nearby. At first glance, it seemed possible, but detectives quickly noticed inconsistencies. There were signs suggesting the scene had been arranged rather than genuinely ransacked. The mess looked deliberate, considered, like someone had read about burglaries rather than actually committed one. And then came the first major question. Why would a burglar attack Rachel in the middle of the day, yet take almost nothing of value? A house full of the things burglars come for: electronics, jewelry, cash, largely untouched. Investigators began looking closer, not outward, but inward. Rachel's phone became one of the most important pieces of evidence. Stored inside were multiple voice messages left the day she died. Some were from worried family members, one from the Montessori school asking where she was, and several from Joe himself. In one message, he pleaded. He said he was driving. He said he was worried. He asked her to call him back. He even claimed he had been crying. To the public, the messages sounded like heartbreak, but detectives weren't listening emotionally. They were listening scientifically, because every voicemail carried something invisible, a timestamp. And when investigators compared those timestamps with mobile phone location data, the story began to unravel. Phone records showed activity placing Joe's phone near the family home during a time he claimed he was elsewhere. The timeline didn't match. The worried husband searching for his missing wife appeared to be far closer to the crime scene than he admitted. The voicemails suddenly looked different. Not panic, performance. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered extensive communication between Joe and Nikki Pelly. Calls, texts, frequent contact, including multiple conversations on the very morning Rachel died. Messages revealed emotional intimacy, future plans, even references suggesting a life together. Prosecutors argued this provided motive. According to testimony, Joe had even encouraged Pelly to downplay their relationship to investigators because it could make him appear suspicious. That instruction alone said something. Innocent men don't coach their partners on how to speak to police. Now, investigators saw a possible narrative: a failing marriage, an affair, a desire for a different life, and a carefully constructed alibi built through phone calls and voicemails. The case became a puzzle made almost entirely from digital evidence. In 2004, this was still new territory for Irish investigations. Mobile phone triangulation, using cell tower data to track the location of a device, was not yet a courtroom standard, but the Gardaí used it anyway, and what they found was extraordinary. Detectives analyzed phone traffic, call durations, cell tower locations, message timestamps. They built a map of where Joe's phone had been throughout that entire morning, and the map told a story that contradicted everything he had said. His phone appeared active near the house when Rachel was believed to have been killed, not across town, not in a Dublin office block, right there. Circumstantial evidence began stacking piece by piece. Individually, each detail seemed small. Together, they formed a powerful timeline, one prosecutors described as impossible to ignore. In the weeks following Rachel's death, Joe appeared publicly as a grieving husband. He gave interviews. He spoke about his loss. He even participated in a televised appeal asking for information about the killer. He stood in front of cameras and asked the public for help finding whoever had done this, looked directly into the lens, said the words. But investigators noticed contradictions in everything he said. His behavior was off, not in the way grief makes people behave strangely. Grief is unpredictable, messy, raw. This was different. This was controlled, managed, like someone following a script they'd written in advance. And then came one of the most disturbing discoveries of the entire investigation. When Rachel's body was exhumed, detectives found a handwritten letter placed inside her coffin, written by Joe himself. In it, he expressed love. He asked for forgiveness, for reasons, he wrote, that only they knew. Only they knew. Think about that for a moment. An innocent man doesn't write a secret apology to his murdered wife and hide it where no one is supposed to find it. An innocent man has nothing to apologize for. To investigators, that letter was as close to a confession as they had, not in a courtroom sense, but in a human one. In 2007, Joe O'Reilly stood trial for murder. The Central Criminal Court in Dublin, one of the most watched trials in the history of the state. The prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. There was no recovered murder weapon, no eyewitness. But there was something increasingly powerful in modern investigations: digital truth. Jurors heard about the phone locations, the affair communications, the timeline contradictions, the voicemails, the coffin letter. Piece by piece, prosecutors argued that Joe staged a burglary and attempted to create distance from the crime using phone calls designed to show concern. That the voicemails were not the sounds of a worried husband. They were insurance, an alibi recorded in his own voice. The defense maintained his innocence. They challenged the phone data. They questioned the reliability of triangulation. They pushed back on motive. But the timeline told another story. After weeks of testimony, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty. Joe O'Reilly was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of his wife, Rachel. He has never confessed. To this day, he maintains that he did not kill her. The Rachel O'Reilly investigation became a landmark case in Ireland. It demonstrated how mobile phone evidence could reconstruct reality more accurately than eyewitness memory. Voicemails, once seen as emotional expressions, became forensic evidence. Technology exposed inconsistencies that human storytelling could not hide. The techniques used in this case set a new standard, a new precedent. Joe O'Reilly helped build the very toolkit that now catches killers like him. For Rachel's family, the conviction brought justice, but never closure. Because behind every headline was a mother who never came home to her children, 2 little boys who grew up without her, and Rose Kalali, who found her daughter that day, who carried that image, who pushed and fought and refused to let the case go quiet, finally saw a jury say the word she had waited years to hear: guilty. Rachel was 30 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She deserved better than what happened inside that house, and she deserved to be remembered. Sometimes the truth isn't revealed by what people say, but by when they say it.